Before we begin, if you're working in services and want to strengthen your understanding of ketamine use and how to embed it into practice, free professional resources are available at our website. We also offer specialist training and consultancy services. Please contact us for details. We also offer an evidence-informed e-learning course focused on ketamine awareness. All links are in the episode description. This series discusses ketamine use, physical and mental health impact, dependency, medical complications, and related harms.
Some interviews include people sharing lived experience or personal loss.
If anything we discuss feels overwhelming, please pause and access support. Information is available in the podcast description.
If you're listening with children or in a shared space, please consider that before continuing.
Hello and welcome to our new three-part special on ketamine, which is a follow-up podcast to our ketamine deep dive that we did last year. My name is David Gill.
And I'm Andrew James.
Throughout this podcast, we're going to be speaking to a range of individuals who have personal use or people around them have used, as well as a range of professionals from a variety of different organisations. So in my day-to-day work, I have spent a lot of time exploring the world of ketamine in terms of resources, education, training for a range of different services. So this is something that has been sort of on my mind repeatedly over and over again. And I've got a lot of areas that I want to sort of think about and explore. But I'm aware that people like yourself, Andrew, perhaps haven't had as much focus on this, awareness on this. So I guess just from your perspective about what you've seen in the media, what you've heard people talk about, where do you think we're at in terms of a society in ketamine then?
Obviously, I spend my working career within drug services and criminal justice. You do see a lot more cases, anecdotally, of people coming in, using, people going through the courts in possession of or possession with intent to supply. Certainly all of those things are on the rise and are things that I've noticed and I've spoken to colleagues and friends in the industries that we've seen. But again and again, the repeated factor that you see in terms of media or any sort of news outlets, the situation is always the same as it is with any sort of substance use. It's sensationalized, it's simplistic, and it's always with a view to reinforcing the notion of prohibition being the only possible factor. Now, we know the latter is ridiculous, and anyone within the services will know that the others are fairly similarly ridiculous too, but that is the sort of repeated bombardment that is consistent with drug use and drug industries. And that's the sort of thing that I think we're looking to debunk or at least demystify in some way during this process.
I do find it interesting about ketamine because even though we are going to dive deep into it as the substance and the impact it's having, but what I find really interesting about is how it's shining a light on, as you say, the world of drug legislation, drug laws, how we are still in 2026 using the 1971 Misuse of Drugs Act, which is 55 years old. And it's felt outdated for so long, but repeatedly politicians are not being brave enough to explore new ways of responding to people who use drugs, because we know people use drugs. It's been part of the human condition since we've been upright. We also know that, sadly, drug-related deaths every single year are going up. And it's telling us one thing, that perhaps the approach we are taking just isn't working. Something like ketamine comes along that shifts our response to drugs. It's a different type of drug that a lot of services are seeing. It's not alcohol, it's not opiates. It's not crack. And suddenly people are having to think about what this means in terms of our approach. And it then starts to open up wider debates of, is the legislation working? Are we sort of meeting people's needs? You have to look at as well the last couple of years. Up in Glasgow last January in 2025, they opened their first drug consumption room, which has had a very mixed response, which from my personal opinion, I think is a fantastic idea, but a lot of media outlets have not necessarily presented it in the positive way. Only in the last few weeks, we've had the Advisory Council for the Misuse of Drugs argue that ketamine should remain a Class B drug, which is quite, I guess from my perspective, it was quite a surprise, because I felt that the automatic response was ketamine's growing, it's bad, let's make it a Class A, which I felt could just stigmatize a lot more people. So again, is that maybe showing a different response to this? Although there is, of course, the caveat that the government doesn't have to listen to the Advisory Council. They are the Advisory Council, not the telling council. And history has shown in the past when they feel that they can overrule it. The cannabis Professor Nutt situation from many years ago, they will. But it is interesting, the debate it's having. Throwing to that, I think just this last week, we've had Zach Polanski from the Green Party talking about legalizing or decriminalizing drugs as a possible solution, which it for me feels like the first time a politician has ever, particularly at his level, openly said, let's at least have the debate. And immediately, as you can imagine, the pushback on that was absolutely not, you're going to make everyone a drug user, which history and global approaches have shown us that just isn't the case. So yes, we are here talking about ketamine, but I do think, interestingly, it's opening up the wider debate about drug use.
Currently, globally, we're facing very specific economic circumstances and a very difficult political climate. But within that brings the opportunities, perhaps, for new solutions and different ways of doing things, breaking from the norm, which is something that is bold and something that Zach Polanski seems to be attempting to do by his comments. And I think that is a potential positive to look forward to, changes from old ways of maybe finding new solutions to old problems, moving forward in a more positive way. But for now, we're here to talk about the current position, how things currently look in this country and beyond in regards to ketamine.
The way I see ketamine's increase in availability and popularity with younger people now is it basically a glimpse into the future of non-opiate drug use. We're going to see more and more of non-opiates being used in the main and not as a focus on opiates so much. And we've got to catch up. The whole landscape of drug use is changing. It's already changed.
That was Peter Furlow, the National Harm Reduction Lead for Change, Grow, Live. Looking at the most recent data from the Office for National Statistics and the Crime Survey of England and Wales, year ending March 2025, ketamine use remains relatively low overall. Around 2% of people aged 16 to 24 reported using ketamine in the last year. There was no statistically significant change from the previous year. Among people aged 16 to 59, use sits at around 0.8%. Slightly higher than earlier years, but still representing a small proportion of the population.
However, treatment data tells us a more complex story. In 2024 to 2025, 5,365 adults started treatment where ketamine was identified as a problem substance. That compares to just 426 people in 2014 to 2015. Amongst under 18s, the increase has also been significant, rising from around 512 to 1,201 between 2021 and 22 to 2023 and 24. In the same period, over 169,000 adults entered treatment for any substance. Ketamine remains a smaller proportion overall, but the growth trend is clear.
So what have services noticed in the last year? We decided to catch up with some people from the previous podcast to find out.
I'm Lisa Buckley. I work for Change, Grow, Live. I am currently the Head of Engagement, Involvement and Inclusion. That's a new role that I've been in for about the last 2.5 months. Prior to that, I was the national lead for Detox and Rehab. I think conversations around ketamine, from my perspective across our organisation, have been elevated, and the people who have been working locally and regionally for many years who recognised as long as 5 years ago, 6 years ago, that this was coming. I've been really pleased to see that their voices have been elevated to a national level. But it isn't just about, and it wasn't just about the conversations around ketamine. It was ensuring that our services and the people who work in them and the people who access them were getting the right support that they needed, so that staff had the right resources, tools and knowledge to be able to support people that were accessing, that treatment was easier to access, that it wasn't one size fits all, that it was easier for people to access, knowing some of the physical and mental health issues that people are experiencing that were using ketamine, to make that experience easier for them. And I feel that we're further along with that. It's definitely more visible. It's spoken about. People know where to go to, hopefully, to access that information. And ultimately, I hope that people who are using ketamine maybe get better, more informed response.
I'm Jo Moore. I'm a registered nurse and registered manager at Birchwood at Kaleidoscope House for Kaleidoscope, the organisation, and we're based in Heswell in Merseyside. I think within the community settings, I've seen more services be more proactive in arranging group sessions online to support those individuals that can't always make it into the hub or the service that they might have to visit. I've seen people, especially key workers, NMPs, focusing on, that outreach service and providing home assessments. And I think, this is amazing to see, because we were stuck in a really archaic way of working within substance use, and people were asking people to jump through hoops. And actually, if somebody doesn't engage, we need to move away from the point of people just won't engage, so they get taken off the list, or they just keep being placed on a list for a later date when they're ready to engage. Actually, if you give somebody a bit of hope and you go to their house and you say to them, we understand about the drug, because the people that use ketamine are normally the people that know far more than the professionals. And people having neurology assessments, within their first couple of key work sessions, and having that clinical assessment by the nursing team, looking at their blood work to check, that their kidneys and liver function is okay. So those kind of standard, I would call them foundation level of input and assessment that's really needed at the first engagement, because otherwise we don't know what category that person is in at that point. So what we're looking at is somebody knowing what the blood work is, knowing what the weight and height is, and checking if they are able to then come into the hub at some point, or whether we still need to do home assessments. So that's really positive. We've also seen key workers looking at a sort of 20-minute intervention. So because of the short-term memory, the capacity issues for people that use, more than 3 times a week, we're seeing that actually they can only really concentrate for around 20 minutes long, and actually they're disrupted. So group sessions or one-to-one sessions can be highly disrupted due to people having to leave for incontinence reasons, frequency of urination, pain, and not being able to actually concentrate for any longer. So those are wonderful things happening in the community.
Testing services such as Wedinos show that samples submitted as ketamine are usually what they claim to be. It's also unusually cheap, sometimes as low as £5 per gram. That raises an important question. Why is purity high and cost low?
In countries including Austria, Germany and the Netherlands, ketamine is regulated as a medicine, meaning it moves through supply chains differently. Investigations in Belgium uncovered at least 28 consignment switches between 2023 and 2025, involving an estimated 28 tons of ketamine. In some cases, legitimate shipments were diverted. Containers were replaced with salt or transported empty, while the real product moved separately. There is also a concern that supply chains could shift, introducing more dangerous substances such as nitazines.
In emergency departments and acute settings, clinicians report ongoing presentations linked to bladder complications and psychological distress. What stands out is not a sudden surge, but persistence. Cases are not disappearing, they're becoming more visible.
More professionals now recognise ketamine-specific risks than they did several years ago. But recognition does not automatically translate into prevention.
Liverpool has become a notable hotspot for ketamine use in recent years due to a combination of factors. We spoke to the young people's team at CGL Liverpool to find out more.
I'm Alex Larry, so I'm the Services Manager for the Children and Young People in Liverpool.
My name's Amy Bradley. I'm the Children and Young Persons Ketamine Lead for Liverpool. Essentially what I do is I work with anyone from the age of 11 to 23.
So I think we started to notice the increase of referrals from around 2023, end of 2023, 2024. And then our main substance referral started coming through as ketamine. And I think we started responding to it more proactively and through trial and error from 23 to 24, we were able to develop a quick responding pathway when responding to ketamine clients. And unfortunately for us, we had our first death of a young person in 2025. So I suppose that paved the way for us as to how we can respond effectively to the ketamine, to the response to this crisis of the ketamine. And from that, we were able to help support the influx of referrals that have come through. So from that, we created a designated ketamine specialist lead post, which is Amy. So Amy got the majority, or Amy got every referral as it stood back then in 2025 of all of our KET referrals. They have slightly spilt out to the rest of the team to deal with the capacity and the traffic that are coming through. But Amy's dealing with our complex referrals. So along with the team, Amy also helps to support for detox referrals, rehab referrals. And I think what we've developed in Liverpool is a better response to supporting young people when going into detox and rehab and making sure that we treat it case by case and we're not just doing one referral for everyone. So we've explored different options when it comes to detox, whether it suits them, whether the rehab suits them, and we're doing pieces of work where we go to the rehabs and link in with the rehab teams to work out whether it'll suit the needs of the young person.
Last year, it was more a case of we was going around a lot, doing a lot of education, a lot of like social workers, teachers in and out of all the schools and raising that awareness. And I think at the time, to be honest, no one quite fully understood the scale of what it was about to come or like what we was in store for. So I think now, like, essentially we are really pushing towards more of like prevention and stuff like that, but previous to that we was more just like spreading the word and making everyone else aware, because like Alex said, we were a little bit ahead of the curve because we'd already noticed it on the rise. And like sometimes when we speak to CGL and other areas, they haven't even had an increase yet. So I feel like we was already ahead of the thing, but it was last year was more just going around and spreading the word, making people aware and giving that drug education and harm reduction out to people and parents and stuff like that, which I think again has really helped us this year, because now that it's on the increase, people know where to go now rather than people not knowing what to do or where to start. And we've had loads of other like services popping in saying, is there any chance you can help us? Can you do this? So I think that was vital for us last year to be able to do that. So then this year we can help others and obviously help all our clients as well.
It is important to remember that many people who experiment with or occasionally use ketamine will never experience serious harm.
That matters because effective responses can't rely on fear alone. They require education, early intervention, and accessible support.
Harm reduction approaches must sit alongside structural clinical pathways.
Both are necessary.
I'm Lydia Plant. I'm the Chief Executive at Bristol Drugs Project, and I've been working in the drug and alcohol field for about 16 years. but working with people that use ketamine probably for about 14 of those. So it's something that I'm, very passionate about.
I'm Lauren Stewart. I am a cluster manager with Change Grow Live. I also lead on CGL's kind of work nationally with young adults. Aside from my work with CGL, though, I'm also a consultant to the events and festivals industry, specifically around safeguarding, which does include obviously a lot of practice around drug use, etc. So really connected into the ketamine space in quite a lot of different avenues. Anybody that knows me knows that I've been waffling on about ketamine for some time. I feel like it's one of those conversations that, it's kind of been ongoing for the last 10 years. But I think obviously some of the things that we've seen more so in 2025 is the media shift and narrative around ketamine use. Quite, it's kind of taken quite a lot of heat this year. I think in terms of sort of trends of use, etc., I think there is a lot more of a kind of normalized approach to ketamine. I hope that's not the kind of wrong thing to say in this, but I think when you see the sort of shift, I think particularly kind of around young people and young adults and how they talk about ketamine use, and even when you look at some of the kind of statistics, I mean, particularly around kind of student use, you see, roughly around 25% of students disclose having used ketamine in the last 12 months. So there is quite a significant shift in use. But I think what comes with that is we're all talking more about ketamine as well, which I think has a really good positive impact. We're here in this space now being able to talk about ketamine, but also there's obviously this kind of shift around sensationalized media approaches, etc.
Bristol has long been associated with ketamine for a lot of people. Sometimes it's called Bristol Crystal, maybe just locally, or the Bristol Bladder.
I've not heard that one before.
Oh yeah,
okay.
Bristol Bladder, yeah. So it's something that we've been seeing and working around for a long time. But we have definitely seen an uptick in people seeking treatment for ketamine. I think what's interesting is I would echo what you're saying. We've seen it's been probably 18, 19 years of people seeking support for bladder problems, for dependent ketamine use, for gastro problems, a range of things. And but what we are seeing is people starting to look for ways to respond to it, which is really, really good to see. But yeah, like you, I am a bit worried about the kind of sensationalism, the language being used around people that use ketamine and ketamine itself. And I think also, there was a lot of media this year, the Matthew Perry, the Vivian. Some, celebrities really sadly losing their lives around ketamine, which has kind of, brought a bit of a focus in.
In October 2023, actor Matthew Perry died aged 54 due to the acute effects of ketamine, which led to drowning in a hot tub. The ketamine caused loss of consciousness, which likely led to the accidental drowning. The death was officially ruled an accident. Similarly, in January 2025, drag performer James Lee Williams, best known as the Vivian, died aged 32 at their home in Cheshire. A coroner later concluded that Williams died from cardiorespiratory arrest caused by ketamine use, with the death recorded as misadventure.
The other thing that I've noticed around ketamine, probably this year, maybe last year as well, is an increasing interest in the adulterations or the what else is in ketamine. We've had medetomidine, we've had potentially xylazine, conversations about nitazines, and quite frequent rumours amongst people that use drugs or amongst people that use ketamine about, what else is in there. But I actually think that's a really positive engagement around an increase in like drugs checking, reagent testing, like kind of just awareness around it. So it's really, actually, that's a really nice thing to see. Although it's a bit worrying to see what is going into ketamine at the moment, it's also nice to see people engaging around keeping themselves safe and checking their drugs.
It's really interesting that you kind of mentioned that as well, thinking about the kind of risk end of that. I think something that I've seen more so across the festivals is like, I don't know how to describe it, but like the way that it's kind of sold within event spaces and the way that it's kind of things like flavored ketamine. Sorry, this is where I'm like going with this. It's like when I have conversations with people that aren't working in event spaces on the kind of drug side, but work more in kind of specialist services, etc. And I talk about the concept of flavored ketamine. They're like, "Oh my God, I've never heard of this." And I'm like, that's quite a standard thing that we kind of see in the events world. So when you talk about the kind of adulterants end as well, you also talk. I think it's also necessary to say about the kind of more glamorized end of that world. And do you know, does that make sense?
Like, yeah, totally. Yeah, and the marketing around, rhino ket, high strength ket, flavored ket, colors, like and interesting. I think to like explore the different perceptions of ketamine, and I think there's a real danger that as providers and as messaging, that we focus on this really negative perception of ketamine. Obviously, it's not dismissing any of the harms or any of the risks or the concern that people have. But I think what's interesting is like I'm noticing a narrative around ketamine from providers and sometimes, the government's media, things like that, that is around kind of ketamine. Why would anyone ever use that? Dirty care, kind of this kind of like seeing it as this horrible, seedy, harmful, yucky drug that the people are, 11-year-olds are having for breakfast, and this kind of sensationalism that actually doesn't connect with a lot of people's experience of ketamine. Which is both positive and negative. And as we know, when we're kind of perpetuating those stigmatized views of a drug, it stigmatizes the people that take that drug. And so I think you're right, like it's really important to engage with, if we want to get downstream and start engaging with the people that use ketamine occasionally or a couple of times a week or on binges or growing use, so that we can intervene and reduce harm at an earlier stage, we absolutely have to start having better conversations about recreational party, all of those things, and what it is people like about ketamine, and engage with that.
So what is the experience of using ketamine? We spoke to someone to find out.
My name's Mikey. I'm a former ketamine user. I'm in recovery for ketamine. I'm 27 years old. I started on ketamine when I was around 16. I literally didn't know about drugs. I didn't even think drugs were real until I was 16, and I know that sounds daft, but I thought it was just like in movies and such. I'd never heard of it. I never knew people who'd done them. I knew about weed, tell a lie, that was it. But not, pills and ketamine and all this stuff. When I got to 16, that's when I was introduced to pills. So at that point, I think it was around prom time in school. So I was still technically in school, in the school year. And we done it after prom that night. That was the first time. From then on, we've done pills and like magic, going to like festivals, like raves and stuff like that. And then I ended up doing pills and magic. Like it was like a ritual every Friday. And my parents used to be out, and so I'd have a free house. So my mates would come round to mine and would literally do it religiously every Friday. Bear in mind, I've not even heard of ketamine at this point, but like one night when we was taking these pills and magic, one of the lads had said, "Oh, should we get some ketamine?" And at that point, it was £20 for a gram. So one of them had went to God. I think we all went to get it actually. Came back to mine, and then bear in mind we're pretty fucked up at this point on the pills and magic, and then we ended up taking the ketamine, and I'd never felt anything like it. Like it literally was like an escape from reality. I remember just sitting there on the couch, off my face, but with my arms laid back, with my arms out, and I was just like, I couldn't move. No one was speaking. Everyone was just, flying basically. And I just thought at that point, I thought, wow, what is that drug? But it was the mixture of everything else. But at that time, I didn't really know that it was just because of the mixture. So going forward from that, I'd start some the next day, so I'd take it the next day. I'd start taking it weekly, picking up every week when I was going out or doing what we was doing. Before you know it, it would then end up being in the week as well as the weekend. But it gets to a point where you don't actually know. you don't realise that you are now addicted to it, and you don't know you're doing it every day. Even though you're sniffing it and you're sniffing it, you don't think in your head, shit, I'm addicted to it. So before you knew it, I was just waking up and doing it in the morning. And from then on, it just went off on a tantrum. And it was increasing usage. I was going from that first gram that we picked up and shared between about 3 or 4 of us has now gone to like an 8 for a queue of me sniffing it alone. And then I got to the point where I was doing it through work. And then that's kind of at that point, I still didn't know when you had a problem, but you've got a problem. I didn't pick up that I had a problem until around COVID. But when it clicked was the pains. The pain kicked in around COVID time. It'd start with like what you'd think would be back pain. Now, this wasn't back pain. I went to my doctors multiple times. They referred me for physio, saying that it could have been due to my posture because, again, COVID was there. I was working from home. I was working from my bed every single day, 8 hours a day. Went to physio, that didn't do anything. But then it got to the point where I couldn't physically sit down anymore, that the pain was that bad in my back. And when I finally went back to the doctors and told them about my use, they referred me to go to hospital. But then the hospitals wouldn't do anything either. But then more pain started to come. So you'd have cramps, which people call cat cramps. So you'd be keeled over, you couldn't move, you couldn't walk. Bladder problems, I'd be going to the toilet every 20 minutes. Then I'd get to the point where I'm weeing out blood clots. And from then on, I was like, shit, I'm fucked here. I've got a big problem. And that was kind of the turning point around COVID time. So at that point, growing up taking it, there was a girl, I remember it to this day, she used to always say, every time I was at her house, if you carry on sniffing that, you're going to end up with ketamine cramps and you're going to end up losing your bladder or with a piss bag. And when you're in that moment and you're in your addiction, you laugh it off, don't you? You're like, that's not going to happen to me. It's not happening to me now. So you just continue to do what you're doing without thinking of what damage it could cause in the future. And I think at that time, it was years back, so no one actually knew what ketamine had done to people because I'd not heard anything of anyone at that point. So the only other person, there was about 2 or 3 of us who were as bad as each other with taking ketamine. And it only got to the point where one of my friends had to get his bladder removed. But even at that point, that still didn't trigger me to stop. That I carried on going even though I knew that that's where it was going and that's the only way it would go. Because we was as bad as each other in terms of pain, but unfortunately he's a little bit older than me. He was taking it a bit longer than me. So I thought, I'm still fine now. Still got years left to go. And then there was a case where someone died as well. That was from ketamine use. Again, death. Death should be something that triggers you to stop. But death, it didn't even make me want to stop. I still carried on and continued to use. But at the same time, I knew I had a problem. I already knew at this point that this was a serious problem and I need to get it sorted. But it still didn't make me want to stop.
And the situation with ketamine now is that snapshot of things to come, and both treatment and harm reduction have got to catch up with that, and we've got to make it more attractive for people to engage with. Your majority of ketamine users wouldn't dream of coming into a community drug team space, so it's how we make that offer more viable and more attractive and probably take it out to people and not expect them to come in.
So that was episode 1, the current situation. Join us next time for episode 2, the impact. Until then, I've been Andrew James.
And I've been David Gill.
And this has been Frontline.